Hello. Welcome back again to another Film History MOOC teaching video 9. Are you ready? Here we go. In this teaching video we will look back at the French cinema and the Nouvelle Vague, or the French New Wave. The occupation and post-war cinema. German occupation 1940–45. Fader, Renoir, Duvivier, and Claire in exile. New generation emerged under poetic realism in 1930s. Films that dealt with dark subjects, breaking conventions and taboos, fascism, etc. Jean Cocteau 1889–1963, evokes poetry, myth, death, the unconscious, surreal and psychomythic. Le sang d'un poète blood of a poet 1930, most brilliant. L'Eternel Retour, the Eternal Return 1943. Les Dames du Bois de Boulogne, the Ladies of the Bois de Boulogne 1945. La Belle et la Bête, Beauty and the Beast 1946. Ruy Blas 1947. Les Parents Terribles, The Storm Within 1948. Orphée 1950. Les Enfants Terribles, The Terrible Children 1950. Le Testament d'Orphée, The Testament of Orpheus 1959. Jacques Becker 1906–60. Was assistant to Renoir, dealt with traditional class barriers of French society. Guppy Mains Rouge, It Happened at the Inn 1943, realistic portrait of peasant life. Fal Ballas Paris Frills 1945, drama in Parisian fashion houses. Antoine et Antoinette 1947, tale of young love in working class milieu. Rendezvous de Juillet 1949, attitudes and ambitions of post-war youth. Edouard et Caroline 1951, young married life in high society. Casque d'Or Golden Helmet 1952, visually sumptuous masterpiece, doomed love at the turn of the century Paris. Touches pas au gris by Honor Among Thieves 1954, sophisticated tale of rivalry between contemporary Montmartre gangs, started the Vogue gangster films and thrillers. Le True the Whole, The Night Watch 1960, his final masterpiece, in a prison cell 5 men plot ill-fated escape, exploration of loyalty, freedom, and human dignity. Henry Georges Clouzot 1907–77. Career marked by scandal, his films were brutal, sordid, neurotic, and controversial. Le Corbeau, The Raven 1943, chief progenitor of French film noir, dark pessimistic tale of a town destroyed by poison letters, is a masterpiece of psychological suspense, suspended from French film industry because seemed to be anti-French and produced by Nazi-owned Continental Corporation. Quai de Fevre's Jenny Lamour 1947, violent thriller that transcended its genre by creating Hitchcockian suspense. Manon Lescaut 1949, modernized to post-liberation Paris of black market and illegal immigration. Le Salaire de la Peur, The Wages of Fear 1953, masterpiece of unrelenting horror and alienation, European expatriates in US driven by despair, greed, and suicide mission. Les Diaboliques 1955, horrific suspense involving a complicated murder plot in a boarding school. Les Espions, The Spies 1957, set in a psychiatric clinic, failed attempt to combine bitter naturalism and surrealistic fantasy. La Vérité, The Truth 1960, murder trial narrated in flashback. La Prisonnière, The Prisoner 1968, controversial, experimental, and perverse examination of the dynamics of sexual degradation. Robert Bresson 1901–1999. Except for film noir, post-war French cinema was still trapped in literary adaptations, war didn't produce a break in cinematic traditions in France like Italy, except for innovative work of Robert Bresson and Jacques Tati. These two films established him as a serious and disciplined artist with the scénariste or literary tradition of French cinema. His films are painstakingly crafted to bring to life spiritual dilemmas, moral struggles of individuals. Les Anges du Péché, The Angels of Sin 1943. Les Dames du Bois de Boulogne, The Ladies of the Bois de Boulogne 1945. Le Journal d'un Cure de Campagne, The Diary of a Country Priest 1950, adapted from Georges Bernanos's novel, displayed highly personalized style whose psychological realism predicated on absolute austerity of acting, dialogue, and mise-en-scene. All his later films displayed austerity and precision of style. Some critics called him a classicist, but he saw himself as a realist practicing close to the borderline of abstraction. Un condamné à mort est échappé à man escaped 1956, a masterpiece, The Arrest, escape and recapture of a young resistance fighter during the occupation, and takes place almost entirely in the condemned man's cell. L'Argent 1983, based on a story by Tolstoy, devoid of psychology, is about a man's irreversible descent into crime and degradation, won the Grand Prix for Best Direction with Andrei Tarkovsky's Nostalgia. Jacques Tati 1908–82. Before film, was a music hall entertainer and pantomimist, became one of international cinema great comic talents in post-war era, master cinematic humorist, rivaling masters of silent films like Max Linder, Charlie Chaplin, and Buster Keaton. Humor in his films, largely visual, achieved through scrupulous planning and brilliant mime. Les Vacances de M. Hulot, Mr. Hulot's Holiday 1953, created a new comic character, M. Hulot, a vague, wacky, middle-class Frenchman. Holidays in Brittany, misadventures were meticulously worked out gags. Mon Uncle My Uncle 1958, he turned to the more serious vein of satire. Old Quarter Paris contrasted to brother-in-law's antiseptic and mechanistic environment of an ultra-modern house, and works as an executive in a plastic factory. Playtime 1967, humorous vignettes of American tourists seeing real Paris and end up experiencing a space-age city of steel, glass, chrome, and plastic. Color and widescreen format, took 3 years to complete. Modernist masterpiece, but multimillion-dollar commercial failure, financed it himself, went bankrupt. Sustained, intelligent humor. Made Traffic 1971 to recoup his losses, minor Hulot film commenting on the automania of modern industrial society. Parade 1974, last work, children's film made for Swedish television that features Tati performing pantomimes in a circus. After this developed another Hulot film to be called Confusion, but could not find backing for it. Died at 74, only made 5 films because he was a painstaking craftsman who planned every detail of his films far in advance. He deserves to be ranked with the greatest silent comedians for the breadth of his humanity and restrained brilliance of his comic achievement. Max Ophuls 1902–57. German Jew, directed films with UFA in the 1930s, also made films in Italy, Netherlands, and France. Had a profound influence on the New Wave generation. Forced to flee to Hollywood when France fell to the Nazis in 1940s, and made some of his best films. The Exile 1947. Letter from an Unknown Woman 1948. 1949, Caught, and The Restless Moment. Returned to France in 1949, entered the period of his greatest creativity and made 4 elegant and masterful films, dazzling mise-en-scene, meticulous details. He died in 1957. La Ronde 1950, 10 episodes that love is a perpetual roundabout, a partner is exchanged for another until becomes full circle, like the movement of a waltz. Le Plaisir House of Pleasure 1952, pleasure easy but happiness not. Most famous sequence is the cameras circling the exterior of a brothel, never entering it, voyeuristically peering through the windows. Madame de. The Earrings of Madame de. 1953, another circular narrative of a pair of earring husband to wife, to mistress, to wife's lover, to husband again that rotates around vanity, frivolity, lust, and infidelity. Camera movement like a waltz. Lola Montes 1955. Considered his masterpiece, most intricate, opulent and elaborate film to appear on the French screen. Big-budget super spectacle in Eastman color and cinemascope, with international cast of stars. Commercial failure, Gamma bankrupted. Scandalous life of a mediocre 19th century dancer who became mistress of composer Franz Liszt. Revolutions of 1848, ends up a circus performer selling kisses to earn her keep. He thought same as Madame de, merely gave him opportunity to do a period film. Begins and ends with circus tent and series of achronological flashbacks tried to make it chronological. 1969 original version was reconstructed. Camera never seems to stop its circular tracking, metaphor of life. Narrative was so unconventional. Mastery of the long take of continuous moving camera. Excellent composition. Documentary and independent movement. French documentary movement influenced the younger generation. Countless documentaries in the 1950s. Began in 1946 with Georges Rouquier's Frabiki, Peasant Life on a Farm. Georges Franga 1912-87, master of French documentary cinema, very original filmmaker. Elie Sang de Bêtes The Blood of the Beasts 1949, his one major film, brutal graphic documentary about daily activity of slaughterhouse, resonant horror of the Nazi death camps. La Tête contre les The Keepers 1958, his one feature, half documentary, half surrealistic of a sane man committed to asylum, cited as forerunner of the new wave. Preoccupied with kidnapping, disfiguration, transplant. Alain Resnais 1922-2014. Hiroshima, Mon Amour 1959, his one feature, Clarion Call of the New Wave. Newt E. T. Brouillard Night and Fog 1955, Horrors of Death Camps. Chris Marker 1921-2012, original and highly personal filmmaker, focusing on documentaries. Jean Rouch 1917-2004, ethnographic filmmaker, apostle of cinema verite in 1960s. Agnes Varden 1928-2019, former photographer, Point Court 1955, foretold New Wave 1 manifestation, edited by Alain Resnais, antecedent of Hiroshima, Mon Amour 1959. Jean-Pierre Melville 1917-73, lover of cinema from early age, produced commercial films. Le Silence de la Mer, The Silence of the Sea 1947, earned admiration of Cocteau, commissioned to direct Les Enfants Terribles in 1949. Quand tu liras cette lettre, when you read this letter 1952, purchase a studio with its success. Bob L. Flambier 1955, location shooting, small crew, unknown actors from neorealism, became a model for New Wave. Roger Vadim 1928-2000, contributed to the economic development of the New Wave, commercial exploitive, impeccable craftsman and elegant stylist. Et Dieu crea la femme and God created woman 1956, one feature with Brigitte Bardot and spectacular commercial success, demonstrated that young directors and new themes can attract large audience. Cahiers du cinéma and film theory. Alexander Astruc 1923–2016 published a highly influential article L'Écran français March 1948, number 144. Concept of camera stylo, to become a means of expression as supple and subtle as that of written language and that would accord filmmakers the status of authors. To break away from the tyranny of narrative and to evolve new form of audiovisual language. The fundamental problem of the cinema is how to express thought. The creation of this language has preoccupied all theoreticians and writers in the history of cinema, from Eisenstein down to the script writers and adapters of sound cinema. Questioned montage and advocated long take. But his own films did not realize the ideal of camera stylo but more German expressionism, highly stylized elaborations of visual imagery, excessive mannered compositions and camera angles. Cahiers du Cinéma Cinema Notebooks, founded in 1951 by André Bazin 1918–58 and Jacques Doniel Valcroze 1920–1989, is very influential. Gathered young critics cinephiles such as François Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette, and Eric Rohmer, who became major directors of the New Wave. Two principles: rejection of montage aesthetics in favor of mise-en-scène, long take and composition depth. Personal artistic expression signature. Truffaut, January 1954, number 31. Cinémathèque Française in Paris, magnificent film archive and public theatre, founded in 1936 by Georges Franjou and Henry Langlois. Today it is the largest public film archive in the world, housing over 50,000 films, 3 theatres, and a museum in Palais de Chaillot devoted entirely to film history. Langlois preserved works of Griffith, Keaton, Gans, Vigo, and Renoir. The New Wave. 400 coups the 400 blows. François Truffaut, 1959. Made for 75,000 with loan from father-in-law when Truffaut was 27. Lyrical but unsentimental account of adolescent delinquent. Shot on location in Paris. Won Best Direction at Cannes 1959, New York Critics Award for Best Foreign Language Film 1959. Hiroshima, Mon Amour à l'Henri's Naïs, 1959. Relationship between time and memory in the context of terrible atrocity, love affair between French actress and Japanese architect in Hiroshima, recalling past wars in Asia. Narrative modes shifting from objective to subjective in extraordinary sequences, combining dramatic footage of couple making love with documentary footage of the Hiroshima blast. Great commercial success like 400 coups. Won New York Critics Award for Best Foreign Language Film 1960. About the Souffle Breathless. Jean-Luc Godard, 1950. Godard rejects narrative cinema, most characteristic and influential film of the Nouvelle Vague. Shot in 4 weeks for less than $90,000. Modeled on American gangster film. A moral thug on the run who is finally betrayed to the police by his American girlfriend. Contains virtually every major technical characteristics of the new wave film: shaky handheld camera, location shooting, natural lighting, impoverished plot and dialogue, direct sound recording, jagged, elliptical editing, jump cuts. Origins of style. New wave directors were the first film-educated generation, approached cinema from having viewed almost all of film history at the Langlois Cinémathèque Française and written about it theoretically and critically in Cahiers du Cinéma for nearly a decade. Critical and commercial success of the new wave in 1959 was so great that 1960–62, over 100 new French directors were able to find funding for their first features, extraordinary when the industry, formerly conservative, constantly remind us that we are watching a film. Filmicness, artificially created nature, self-reflexive cinema, meta-cinema. Influenced cinema verite, a chief documentary mode of the 1960s and 70s. François Truffaut 1932–84. Most commercially successful of the post-New Wave group, maintained his independence because of his own production company, Les Films du Caris 1961. Most important artist of our time, are films more important than life with an emphatic yes. Preoccupied with obsessive romance. Tire sur le pianiste shoot the piano player 1960. Based on America gangster thriller. Truffaut's breathless. Replete with bizarre visual puns, allusions to other films, explosion of genres, self-reflexive, anti-conventional. Jules Et Jim 1961, Ménage à Trois, emotionally lyrical through unconventional use of telephoto zooms, slow motion, freeze frames, anamorphic distortion and helicopter shot. Erratic adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 1966, his one film in color and English, generally regarded as a failure. 1967 published book-length interview with Alfred Hitchcock, comparing him to Griffith, Hawks and Ford, and also Kafka, Dostoevsky, and Poe. Tribute to Hitchcock, La Marie était en noir The Bride Wore Black 1967. Tribute to Hitchcock and Renoir, La Sirène du Mississippi Mississippi Mermaid 1969. L'Enfant Savage The Wild Child 1969, Wolf Boy, explored confinement vs freedom, social conditioning vs nature. Un belle fille comme moi Such a Gorgeous Kid Like Me 1972, sardonic portrayal of murderous nymphomaniac. La Nuit Américaine Day for Night 1973, self-reflexive cinema, shooting night scenes in daylight through a filter, cinematic illusion, film within a film. El Histoire d'Adèle H. The Story of Adele H. 1975, protagonist's romantic obsession, drawn into her demented world, new cinematic language. 1979, American Film Institute honored him with a 20-year retrospective. Died of brain tumor on October 21, 1984. Jean-Luc Godard 1930. Most prolific and stylistically radical, most influential figures in world cinema, like Truffaut, he is a militantly intellectual and ideologically committed filmmaker. Almost all his films auto-critique interrogated cinema. The whole new wave can be defined, in part, by its new relationship to fiction and reality, tested this relationship by rejecting narrative in favor of praxis, the working out of social and political theory within the cinematic process. Films are dialectical and rhetorical in structure, critical essays. Produced his films quickly and cheaply, not as carefully crafted as Truffaut, technical blunders and undigested facts. Still breaking conventions, even new wave itself. Le Petit Soldat The Little Soldier 1960, banned by French government because commented on the Algerian War. Vivre sa vie My Life to Live 1962, a study of a woman who chooses to be a prostitute, constructed in 12-part sociological tract on the problem of prostitution, complete with statistics and pseudo-clinical jargon. Les Carabiniers The Soldiers The Riflemen 1963, Brechtian detachment, one of his most important work. 1964 formed Anushka Films, Band Apart Band of Outsiders 1964, narrative is straightforward but audience's experience is strangely distanced by running commentary of Godard in which he summarizes the plot for the latecomers, tells us what the characters are thinking, makes observations upon the drab suburban setting or simply reads newspaper headlines. Une femme mariée, a married woman 1964, narrative and documentary style to create sociological study of woman's role in modern culture, 24 hours in the life of married woman having an affair. Alphaville 1963, sci-fi thriller, alienating effects of technology, used contemporary Paris to evoke the future, remind us that the world of Alphaville is already upon us. Pierrot Le Fou Crazy Pete 1965, scriptless and virtually plotless, realizing the Godardian ideal of a film where there has been no writing, no editing, and no sound mixing. Masculine Feminine 1965, turning away from narrative, increasingly ideological, structurally random. Made in USA. 1966. Cinema is capitalism in its purest form. There is only one solution, and that is to turn one's back on the American cinema film intent upon destroying virtually every illusion of cinema. Loosely based on detective thriller. No narrative thread at all, no content, characters speak to the audience, explaining their behavior and commenting on triviality of the plot, dialogue is nonsensical and sometimes deliberately rendered inaudible on the soundtrack. The film's meaning lies in the periphery, comment on political violence, viciousness and stupidity of the right, sentimentality and fecklessness of the left. Do you trawachos kje sayas dl 2 or 3 things I know about her 1966, collage and interview of Parisian housewife turned to casual prostitution to keep herself in middle-class luxury, radical indictment of capitalist technocracy in the West, makes prostitutes of all of us in its system of economic constraints. La Chinoise 1967, 5 students set up Maoist cell and fail, each in his or her separate way to achieve cultural revolution. Weekend 1967, begins with recognizable, violent narrative and ends with apocalyptic vision of the collapse of civilization in the West, cannibalism the mirror image of capitalism. Western civilization is merely a facade elaborated by technology concealing a hardcore of bestiality. La Guy Savoir 1968, rambling cinematic essay on language as an instrument of social conditioning and control, based on philosophical assumptions of structural linguistics. 1+1 1968, there is only one way to be an intellectual revolutionary, and that is to give up being an intellectual nihilism. 1970s preoccupied with ideology, latter work renewed interest in narrative. Roy Armes, he has made a whole generation question the accepted conventions of filmmaking, and his spontaneous, semi-improvised methods of direction have been widely imitated. But he himself remains a solitary, independent figure, pursuing the logic of his own development, totally indifferent to fashion. Sauf qui put la vie every man for himself. Slow Motion 1980, one theatrical feature, technically evocative of his late 1960s films, Metaphysics of Survival Western Capitalism Survivorship, which characteristically constructs analogy between degradation and economic exploitation. J. Vusiliu Marie Hale, Mary 1984, a modern retelling of the Immaculate Conception that affronted the Catholic world. Alright now. There we have it. You have completed this teaching video for Film History MOOC. Thank you and see you all next topic. All the best.